Warning, a secret government takeover is happening right now. You most likely believe that your elected officials, the leaders, are in charge of your own country, right? And that the whole idea of democracy is that, we the people have the power, right? Well, politicians and policymakers are supposedly working for the people who elect them, but sadly, the reality doesn't quite work that way. And more people than ever before are beginning to see this scary reality after being alarmed by the global coordination of democratically elected governments all across the world in response to the events of 2020. Now, this has caused many to begin to ask themselves the very tough questions like, does our vote really matter? How much global cooperation and coordination is going on with each government? How much political power do privately run NGOs or non-government organizations have over our own nation's government? And could there be a private group of central bankers controlling the world? So in this video, I'm going to break down all of this stuff. I'm going to separate the conspiracy theories from the facts. I'm going to explain who's really in charge of the world and why your nation's government may not hold the power you think they do. So let's go. All right, welcome back. If you're new to the channel, my name is Mark Moss, and I make these videos to change the way you think about money because almost everything you've learned is wrong. And today, I have a very special video for you. It's probably going to be a little long, and it's going to be special. I'm using my new studio in some ways we haven't done before, so leave me your comments and let me know what you think about this video. It's a lot of work. If you like it, maybe we'll do more of them. And before I jump in real quick, I want to let you know that this is some scary stuff. The world's changing really fast, and if you don't pay attention, it could be drastic for you. It could be disastrous. And so I'm having a live event, marketdisruptorslive.com. There's a link down below. Some of the best speakers in the world, Danielle DiMartino Booth from the Fed, Luke Grumman, everyone's favorite George Gammon, Harry Dent, the father of cycles, and so many more. Of course, myself as well. There's a link down below, marketdisruptorslive.com. Hopefully you come check it out. All right, now let's go ahead and just jump into this video. All right, so most people think their country is run by their elected leaders. But what if they only controlled things on a small local level, but the big global moves were done by powers way over their head, above their pay grade? It sounds kind of like a fictional James Bond type movie or something, right? I mean, Putin, Zelensky, Biden, they're all making decisions on their own, of course, right? Well, what if I told you that might not be the case? Have you heard of the term NGO? That stands for non-government organizations, meaning they are not part of yours or anyone's government, and they were never elected. And if we're going to get to the bottom of breaking down who really runs the world, let's first start by looking at one of the most influential NGOs in the world. I'm talking about the World Economic Forum, or more commonly called the WEF. Now, I'm sure you've at least heard of the WEF, especially after one of their predictions for the year 2030 went viral, that you've probably heard. I've talked about it dozens of times on this channel. That's right. They want us to own nothing and be happy by 2030. Now, that's their words, all right? That's not mine, but more on this later. Now, the WEF has come under even more pressure recently after being exposed on the Joe Rogan podcast in an interview that's been watched by millions of viewers. He had a guest on recently named Maajid Nawaz. He's an Islamic man who holds a bachelor's degree in political theory. And when he was on the Joe Rogan show on the podcast, he left Joe Rogan speechless more than once, all right, as he exposed the plans of what the World Economic Forum and many other NGOs around the world are doing. Now, during the interview, he explained how the governments all across the world have been captured by a small handful of very powerful people working in these NGOs like the WEF. Now, I constantly tell you, quote, I take them at their word. So rather than me telling you what they've said, let's hear it straight from the mouth of the head of the WEF. I'm talking about good old Klaus Schwab. So let's check that out.
And I have to say, when I mention our names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. But what we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, is that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are actually young global leaders of the world economic forum.
And that's true in Argentina too. Wow. Yeah. Sorry. That's true in Argentina as well.
It's true in Argentina, and it's true in France now. I mean, with the president, with a young global leader. But
All right, so you heard it straight from his mouth. He said, quote, infiltrating the cabinets of governments all across the globe, end quote. All right, he said that with his hand-selected, hard-trained group of young global leaders. Sounds sort of creepy, right? Sounds sort of like, do I say, a conspiracy? Now, that word conspiracy gets thrown around a lot, right? But we can see the literal definition of conspiracy is, quote, to act in harmony with one another and enter into an agreement. Now look, people conspire all the time, right? Everybody acts in harmony towards a common end. We make agreements with each other all the time. The word conspiracy theorist is simply being weaponized so people who think critically for themselves are quickly discredited by being labeled a conspiracy theorist. All right, now back to the WF. So who is this non-elected man, Klaus Schwab? What is the WF and how is he infiltrating the governments all around the world? Well, the World Economic Forum, the WF, was interestingly enough founded in 1971 by their founder, Klaus Schwab, who has made many appearances on this channel before as our favorite James Bond villain. Now, what else is interesting about the year 1971, you might ask? Well, if you're a regular viewer of this channel, then you already know. It's the year then President Richard Nixon removed the dollar and the rest of the world from the gold-backed monetary system and put the world onto a free-floating paper currency fiat system. But for now, back to good old Klaus. Looking into his background, we can see Klaus's grandmother was in fact a Rothschild. We could do a whole video on the history of the Rothschild family and their connections to the central banking cartel. So if you want to see that video, leave me a comment down below. But for now, I'm going to skip past that. But for now, Klaus Schwab has a degree in mechanical engineering, but also gained a doctorate in economics at the University of Freiburg, where he was taught by none other than the infamous Henry Kissinger. Now, it's important to note that Kissinger said, quote, control the food, you control the people. Control the energy, you control a nation. Control the money, and you control the world. So it's no wonder where Klaus and the WF have gotten many of their ideas. Sounds very familiar to where we're at in the world today, right? Food shortage, energy crisis, financial reset. But anyway, back to Kissinger. Like the Rothschilds, he probably needs a full video to describe all the interesting connections he has, but all we need to know for now in today's video is that Klaus, having connections to both the Rothschilds and Henry Kissinger, could probably explain why he was chosen as the man to create the WEF. Now, since founding it in 1971, the WEF has become one of the most influential NGOs in the world. They meet every year in Davos, Switzerland, where they host the top leaders in the world, Fortune 500 executives, CEOs, billionaire philanthropists, and government officials from all around the world. They fly there in their private jets, making plans and policies for the world, for you and I, because, you know, we're not smart enough to know what we want in our life, I guess, right? Now, that's a little bit about Klaus and the WF, but what is their goal? Now, Klaus Schwab has written a number of very interesting books detailing his vision for the world and how he's going to change it with the Great Reset. And I'm sure you've all heard many of the WEF's popular slogans and catchphrases that we all see repeated in the mainstream media today, like all on cue, maybe something like this.
Joe Biden calls it Build Back Better.
Build back better.
Building back better.
To do things differently, to build back better.
We're going to build it back better.
And build it back better.
My plan to build back better.
Start taking all the problems that have been created in education and mental health and start to build back in a positive way.
I have launched a booklet called Build Back Better, Britain After Coronavirus.
It's about building this country back better.
Growing conspiracy following it. It is called the Great Reset.
An unprecedented opportunity to rethink and reset the ways in which we live.
The great opportunity for reset.
The theory even...
All right, that's pretty interesting, right? All the world leaders repeating the exact same catchphrase, build back better. Now, first, that means that first something must be destroyed or torn down in order to build it back, right? Now, don't you think it's strange that all our democratically elected members of governments around the world are all using the same phrases made popular by the WEF, a NGO? Now, it nearly sounds as if they're working for them. Oh, that's right. They are. Klaus says it himself that he's infiltrated governments all around the world. Now, I showed you the video where Klaus was bragging about this, but what he called the Young Global Leaders program. Now, interestingly, the WEF started their Young Global Leaders, we'll call it YGL, program back in 1992, the very same year that the United Nations launched two influential global initiatives titled Agenda 21 and the Sustainable Development Goals program. Maybe that's just another coincidence, like the WF being founded in 1971, right? I don't know. Now, more on the Sustainable Development Goals later in the video, but for now, the YGL is a 5-year course where the members are mentored and trained by the WEF. And this is where the WEF aims to find suitable future leaders for the emerging global society. Or if we put it another way, this is where they can pick suitable people that can be trained in what to think and enforce specific actions and goals that the WEF wants enforced. All right, now, who are some of these YGL, you asked? Well, the program has included a number of extremely influential politicians, business leaders, royalty figures, journalists, performers, Fortune 500 CEOs, and even prime ministers and presidents of countries who have all excelled in their fields since being handpicked by Klaus. Now, some of the most notable names and positions include the current prime ministers from New Zealand, France, UK, and of course Canada. I'm sure you're aware of that one. Actually, let's go over to the whiteboard and let me just show you how big and how deep this web is and see if we can connect some dots and make all of this make sense. Let's go. All right, remember the good old whiteboard? Haven't used this in a while. All right, so let's look at a couple of things from the World Economic Forum, a couple of these dots, see if we can get them to make sense. So the first one we have right here is we have directly from their website, as you can see, the World Economic Forum. And we have some names you might be familiar with, like Justin Trudeau, for example, good old Boris Johnson from the UK, of course, Jacinda Ardern from New Zealand, Angela Merkel from Germany, and of course, Emmanuel Macron from France. Kind of the who's who, all part of the World Economic Forum. And then we have something even bigger, which is more dots to connect, which is the Young Global Leaders. All right, so again, Jacinda Ardern, Justin Trudeau, Emmanuel Macron, Boris Johnson. These are all leaders. We have good old Mark Zuckerberg here. We have the heads of two of the biggest cerveza sickness medicines, we'll call it that. We got Pfizer, Moderna, they just happen to be there. Of course, the head of the WHO, Tedros, he's there. We could sit here all day and talk about this. Gavin Newsom, good old buddy from California, the dictator wannabe. We got Pete Buttigieg, of course, and so many others. These are all directly from their website, all right? This is not some conspiracy. This is just a screenshot. Here's good old Klaus Schwab sitting up at the top of that. So you can start to see these dots are connecting. Now, we also have, if you think Justin Trudeau is acting alone in Canada, as a matter of fact, we have 5 of the top leaders in Canada are also part of the Young Global Leaders program. We got Chrystia Freeland, Elissa Goldberg, Karina Gould, we got Jamit Singh, and Renee Maria Tremblay. All part working together in coordination with Justin Trudeau in Canada. And when you start to see the world connected like this, these dots connected, maybe, just maybe it makes sense as to why the trucker protest and the way Canada responded went the way it did. They kind of showed their hands. Now, what's also interesting is, in light of the world news today, we have good old President Zelensky from Ukraine. the whole world's rallying behind Ukraine, right? Well, he's also part of the World Economic Forum. And it's not just him. He's not playing by himself. As a matter of fact, we have good old Vladimir Putin as part of the World Economic Forum. Now, what's interesting is we have the video of Klaus Schwab bragging about having Putin in. He's listed on the website as being part of the program. And then mysteriously, he just disappeared. Mysteriously disappeared. Apparently, they don't want him to be associated with him anymore, and it keeps getting better. The Forum of Young Global Leaders we have right here. This is, again, from their website. I'm just grabbing some screenshots for you. We have Alexander Soros, you know, good old George Soros, Open Societies. One of the enemies of the United States. I don't know how he's still walking around, but his son, of course, Tulsi Gabbard. What's interesting about Tulsi is she's a Democrat, ran for president on the Democratic platform, but then everything she talks about, she sounds like a Republican or a conservative, almost like she's playing both sides to get people together. On the opposite, we have war hero Dan Crenshaw from Texas, who is a conservative Republican, but now he's talking and making policies like a Democrat. Interesting how these people are working both sides. Mark Zuckerberg, we have one of the Rothschilds, and on and on and on. Now, if this isn't enough to convince you that something's going on, dare I use the word conspiracy again, let's look in and listen to what happened in Canada as one of the MPs asked straight up who is involved from the Canadian government in this. Let's go ahead and play that clip. All right, so what's interesting is that he was being asked a direct question. Klaus Schwab bragged about infiltrating the government. They asked the question, we'd like to know, and they pretended like they couldn't hear. Oh, sorry, we have a bad connection, I can't hear you. However, the people in the audience certainly heard good enough to call him out as spreading misinformation, which is pretty interesting. And it shouldn't be any big surprise. I think I played this clip before. Here's, of course, the PM of Canada, Justin Trudeau. Let's hear a clip of him. And so there, you hear it straight from his own mouth. Remember, like I said, take them at their word. He is praising the dictatorship of China. He wishes he could be like a dictatorship in China. Now, I want to show you something, and this is big here. All right, this is the way that I see the world being broken down. An org chart. If you've ever ran a business or been involved in a business, you understand what an organizational chart is. So up here at the very top of the org chart, we have the BIS. That's the Bank of International Settlements, BIS. The BIS is the central bank of central banks. So each nation has their own central bank, and then all those central banks work together with the BIS. So at the top, we have the BIS. Below that, we have the central banks. Of course, that's the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, Bank of Japan, etc. You get the point. So the bankers are at the top here. This is a coup. The world has been taken over by bankers headed up by the BIS. Now below that, these are all policy makers. These are the ones that are setting the policy for the world, like ESG. If you don't follow ESG guidelines, then no money for you. As a matter of fact, Mark Carney said that companies that don't adhere to ESG will be what he calls, quote, economic roadkill. So the bankers set these policies, and in conjunction with the World Economic Forum right here, among some other ones right here. And then we have the policy distributors. So that's the United Nations, the IMF, the IPCC. IPCC is what sets climate change, which has the carbon credits. We have the World Bank, the WHO. Do I need to say more? So these are the policy distributors. So for example, the bankers and the WEF set a policy, and then the WHO distributes that policy down to who? Down to the policy enforcers. Well, who is that? Well, that's the national governments. That's your government. That's your elected leader way down here on the totem pole. If you ever wondered how the entire world locked down at the exact same time, it's because of the global coordination. The WF pushing it down the WHO, that pushed it down to the national governments, and happened with a snap of a finger. Of course, then we have the policy propagandists. That might be the mainstream media, the fact checkers, politicians, on and on and on. And then finally, here's you and I down here at the bottom, the policy subjects. That makes sense? When you see the world like this, maybe all of these events that are going on right now don't seem so random. Maybe they don't seem like a black swan. Maybe they might seem a little bit coordinated, sort of like a conspiracy. Now, don't just take it from me. Let's dig in a little bit more. We can see directly from the WHO right here. They call this, in the 2005 document, Connecting for Health, the WHO, all right, they talk about the GPP, which we just talked about, the private-public partnership. So they say these changes occurred in a world revised expectations about the role of government. So what's the revised role of government? That the public sector has neither the financial nor the institutional resources to meet their challenges. So the public sector doesn't have that. But a mix of public and private resources is required. So if we could just get big tech to censor information and distribute policies, and we can get big tech to develop apps that we could use to put payment gateways in place, you're starting to get the point. All right, let's get back over the table and we'll go ahead and finish up what we're talking about here. All right, now we all know these NGOs, they're very concerned with climate change, right? 50 years ago, in the WEF's third annual meeting in Davos, it was already talking about how we were headed for an environmental disaster and how we'd consume all the world's resources despite the Malthusians having a long history of being wrong for centuries. Now, these NGOs continue clinging to these outdated ideologies and thrust them upon the world and our governments. Now, we recently did a video explaining how these globalists brought the leaders from around the globe together at the 26th Climate Change Conference called the COP26. It was held in Glasgow in November and put together by the United Nations. Now, here at the meeting, our world leaders were instructed by yet another NGO, the UN, that we need to find, wait for it, 130 trillion of money before 2050 if we want to save the world. Yeah, let's just find an extra 130 trillion, no big deal, right? To hear why I think the war on climate is just another excuse to print money, check out this video I did on it. Editor, go ahead and put that video up here. Now, governments around the world have been pursued by these green agendas put forward by the WF and the WHO and completely disregarded the negative impacts. It's like having on its citizens in the form of rising energy and food prices. Now, people are literally freezing to death in Europe, but they continue enforcing these green agendas. Why? Well, because they're told to by these globalists like the WEF who want more control over their people. Now, we mentioned Agenda 21 and the Sustainable Development Goals earlier in the video. 178 governments from all around the world signed onto these agreements 30 years ago, which signaled the beginning of a more global governance structure. Our governments have already made these plans. And while I don't have time to jump into all this in this video in the details around Agenda 21 and the Sustainable Development Goals, but if you want a separate video for that, leave me a comment down below and I'll do that. We can see another example of outside influence these NGOs have on our governments when we look at the health policies that were mandated by the WHO that our government enforced in response to 2020. Now, the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, was bribed $950 million from the World Bank to enforce lockdowns onto his citizens in 2020. Now, social credit scores are just another global policy being pushed by the IMF. The IMF suggested in mid-2020 that everyone should have a social credit score based on their web search history. And since that suggestion by the IMF, the talk surrounding social credit scores has certainly gained traction in many countries outside of China where they're already implemented. Now, what we're witnessing is a global race between nation states to implement a CBDC system. If we take a step back and ask ourselves, what's the big picture goal of these NGOs? I believe it's all about controlling every aspect of our lives and building what I'm calling movement and payment gateways. Now, we commonly talk about how the economic system needs to be reset, right? But what does it get reset to? Well, we have the IMF moving to implement social credit scores. We have the WEF declaring capitalism has failed and we need to replace it with stakeholder capitalism. We also saw the video of Justin Trudeau openly praising China for its dictatorship and communist ideologies. We can also see that our governments are moving towards implementing a CBDC to create movement and payment gateways that we all have to move through, just like what China currently has. So if we put all these puzzle pieces together It looks as if our Western governments are moving to implement a financial and governance structure similar to what China already has installed. They're using the guise of public safety to implement a digital prison that'll tax, track, and trace every transaction and conversation that we have. Now, the future could be bleak for those not paying attention to where these NGOs are trying to take us. They want to implement their idea of a great reset, but instead, I suggest we move towards the great escape. And really, it's the great race. Can they install this digital surveillance system before enough of us wake up and push back? Well, I'm here to wake you up so we can win this race by pushing back, but I need each of you to spread these ideas, spreading brush fires in the minds of men. Now, besides spreading information, what else can we do? Well, Christine Lagarde from the ECB said herself, Bitcoin is the escape valve. All right? Bitcoin enables you to escape their plans and trap you in the CBDC-backed system. Now again, all roads lead back to the money, and Bitcoin is the next evolution in money. But let me know what you think. This was a very dense topic. Let me know if you want another video that we can further investigate any of these topics down below. And like I said, this is going into a whole new world, a world that is not the same as the one we're leaving behind. And if you want to survive it, come check out the MarketDisruptorsLive.com event. There's a link down below. 15 of the top speakers in the world talking about each area of the market. Greg Foss, Jeff Booth, Luke Grommen, George Gammon, Harry Dent, Danielle DiMartino Booth, myself, of course, and so many others. Come check it out. You do not want to miss this event. Last year was an amazing hit. This year's going to be even better. And that's it. That's what I got. Give me a comment. Let me know what you think. Thumbs up if you like it. If you don't like the video, thumbs down. That's okay. At least tell me why. And that's what I got for you today. To your success. I'm out.